Midnight, July 8, 1863. 1,000 Confederate cavalrymen stare across dark water into forbidden territory. General John Hunt Morgan raises his hand. Behind them, pursuit. Ahead, the Ohio River, gateway to Union heartland. This moment will define careers, destroy lives, rewrite what's possible in war. One signal launches the most audacious invasion of the conflict. I am Captain Thomas Hines, Morgan Scout. I've crossed this river 3 times in darkness, mapping Union positions, studying patrol patterns. Tonight, I watch my commander commit to madness. He knows General Bragg forbade this operation. He doesn't care. Morgan believes one bold strike can shake the North's confidence, perhaps alter the war itself. I believe we're riding toward our graves. The first horses enter the water. They resist, sensing danger their riders ignore. Some animals panic mid-river, throwing troopers into the current. Men struggle to keep rifles dry while controlling terrified mounts. The Ohio runs half a mile wide here. 2 Union gunboats patrol somewhere in this darkness. Discovery means annihilation before we touch northern soil. We cross anyway. At 37, Morgan has become the thunderbolt of the Confederacy. 17 successful raids, countless supplies captured, telegraph wires cut with surgical precision. But Colonel Basil Duke, his brother-in-law, watches this crossing with dread. They've raided continuously since June 11th. Men are exhausted, horses are worn. Yet Morgan insists they can penetrate deeper than any Confederate force has ever ventured. Duke questions silently. By dawn on July 9th, the impossible stands accomplished. Over 1,000 cavalrymen, nearly 2,000 horses, 2 artillery pieces, all on Indiana soil. Private James McCreary scans peaceful farmland, where he expected fortifications. The North feels invulnerable here, protected by rivers and distance. Today, that illusion dies. A Confederate battle flag flies north of the Ohio for the first time in this war. Morgan divides his force into multiple columns. Maximum confusion, increased risk. They'll move fast, strike hard, avoid prolonged battles. Simple plan, reality proves otherwise. Telegraph operators frantically send warnings eastward. Every town they approach will know they're coming. Governor Oliver Morton declares martial law in Indianapolis. 30,000 militia mobilize. Speed becomes their only protection against overwhelming numbers converging from all directions. I'm Sarah Mitchell, shopkeeper in Corydon, Indiana. This morning I watched Confederate cavalry thunder through our streets. My husband grabbed our children and fled. I stayed, hidden in our cellar, listening to boots overhead, voices arguing about what to steal. They took horses, food, merchandise. One young raider couldn't have been 20, apologized while ransacking my store. War has faces now, Southern accents, hungry eyes. Morgan faces his first command crisis. Some troops loot businesses despite orders against pillaging. He can enforce strict discipline and slow his advance, or maintain speed and watch his men become thieves. He chooses speed. Reputation matters less than survival now. This decision will haunt him. Newspapers will call his raiders bandits. Northern citizens will demand harsh treatment for captured Confederates. One choice echoes forward. At Corydon, local militia erects barricades. The battle lasts under an hour. Confederate firepower overwhelms defenders. Yet this small fight costs Morgan something precious: time. Every hour allows Union forces to organize pursuit. General Ambrose Burnside dispatches regular cavalry. Militia companies form across southern Indiana and Ohio. Gunboats patrol the river, cutting off retreat. 20,000 troops hunt the raiders within 48 hours. They cross into Ohio on July 13th. Morgan's troopers become the first Confederate soldiers to invade a northern state force. Newspapers scream about rebel invasion. Citizens demand protection. Lincoln himself monitors the situation. One rogue general has disrupted the entire Union war effort simply by existing behind enemy lines. Psychological impact exceeds military threat. Fear spreads faster than cavalry. Morgan's gamble appears brilliant. I am Lieutenant Colonel Robert Alston. My horse collapsed this morning, 4th Mount. I've ridden to death since crossing the Ohio. We're disintegrating. Men desert in small groups. hoping to hide among civilians or make their way south independently. Captured supplies run out faster than anticipated. Skirmishes with militia whittle down our numbers. What began as organized raid becomes desperate flight. Nobody speaks Morgan's name with reverence anymore. Near Cincinnati, Morgan contemplates his greatest temptation. The city lies vulnerable, its defenses concentrated elsewhere. One bold strike could capture Ohio's most important commercial center. Duke, other officers argue against it. They're too weak, too exposed. Union forces converge from multiple directions. Morgan hesitates, calculating odds, weighing glory against survival. He turns east, choosing escape over fame. This moment defines him not the daring, but the retreat. Union cavalry under Colonel Frank Wolford presses close behind. Gunboats patrol the river southward. Militia blocks roads ahead. Morgan's men ride 100-mile days, changing horses at every town, abandoning equipment to maintain speed. They've become ghosts, appearing suddenly, vanishing before defenders organize. But ghosts grow tired. Pursuers never stop. The chase becomes a race against exhaustion, against arithmetic, against inevitable mathematics of overwhelming force. I'm Emma Bradford, 15 years old, hiding in our barn in eastern Ohio. Through cracks in the wood, I watch Confederate soldiers steal our horses. One raider barely older than me looks terrified, not threatening. His hands shake, loading our mare. Another soldier vomits from exhaustion before mounting. These aren't the demons newspapers describe. They're just boys, far from home, riding towards something they can't escape. At Buffington Island, July 19th, disaster strikes. Union forces cut off Morgan's planned river crossing. Artillery opens from unexpected positions. Federal cavalry charges into Confederate flanks. The battle becomes chaos, men fighting hand-to-hand in gunpowder smoke, wounded horses screaming, desperate soldiers breaking ranks. Morgan's raiders scatter eastward into unfamiliar territory. All cohesion lost. The Great Raid transforms into rout within minutes of engagement. 700 Confederates surrender at Buffington Island. Duke is captured. Perhaps 350 men flee eastward through Ohio. No longer an army, barely organized resistance. Just frightened men on dying horses, riding blindly away from pursuing Yankees. I follow Morgan because I fear prison more than death. We ride until our mounts drop, then steal fresh horses, and continue. There's no plan now. Only flight. The remaining raiders push through eastern Ohio. Some call Morgan's refusal to surrender courage. Others see stubbornness bordering on madness. His men follow not from discipline, but terror. Capture means prison camps, perhaps execution for invading northern territory. Better to ride until horses collapse than face Union imprisonment. So they continue, ghosts fleeing through enemy country, leaving wounded comrades behind, discarding everything except weapons. I am Sergeant Daniel Brewer, Union Cavalry. We've pursued Morgan for 8 days, sleeping 3 hours nightly, changing horses twice daily. My commander says we're making history. I just want this chase to end. We find abandoned Confederate equipment at every crossroads: artillery pieces, supply wagons, even personal belongings. They're shedding weight, becoming lighter, faster. But they can't outrun telegraph wires, coordinating our movements ahead. At West Point, Ohio, July 26th, Federal cavalry surrounds Morgan's exhausted remnant. Only 364 men remain from the original 1,000. Their horses can barely stand. Ammunition is depleted. Escape routes are sealed. Morgan finally, reluctantly, raises a white flag. The greatest cavalry raid of the Civil War ends not in glory, but utter defeat. 18 days of riding, hundreds of miles penetrated. Nothing accomplished except destruction. Newspapers call it Morgan's Great Raid, though greatness is debatable. He rode farther into enemy territory than any Confederate commander over 1,000 miles through Indiana and Ohio. He captured towns, destroyed supplies, spread panic across the North. Strategically, he lost his entire command. 2,000 men began the raid. Most were killed, captured, or deserted. He purchased temporary confusion with permanent losses. Yet uncomfortable truths emerged. The North, for all its industrial might and numerical superiority, remained vulnerable to bold action. A single determined Confederate force penetrated hundreds of miles into Union territory. evaded thousands of pursuers for weeks, demonstrated that Northern citizens felt far less secure than politicians claimed. Morgan lost his command but won the propaganda war. Fear lingers longer than military defeats. I'm John Hunt Morgan, prisoner 74 at Ohio Penitentiary in Columbus. Not a military prison, a civilian facility for common criminals. The insult is intentional. They shaved my head, assigned me a number, locked me in a cell. Union authorities want humiliation, not just captivity. The thunderbolt of the Confederacy reduced to a bald convict. But they underestimate me. I didn't survive 18 days behind enemy lines by accepting defeat. In November 1863, Morgan and 6 officers tunnel through cell floors into a ventilation shaft, emerging outside prison walls at midnight. They steal horses, ride south, cross back into Confederate territory. The escape becomes legend, proof that Morgan's daring survived West Point. Northern newspapers alternately admire his audacity and condemn the lax prison security. Even in defeat, Morgan creates problems for his enemies. The raid's strategic impact remains debated. Morgan believed he diverted Union troops from more important theaters, disrupted Northern morale, demonstrated Confederate capability to strike anywhere. Critics argue he wasted valuable cavalry on a raid with no clear objective. Truth lies between. He achieved tactical confusion, but strategic failure. His men's sacrifice purchased nothing but temporary panic. Audacity without wisdom becomes waste. I am Martha Maddie Reddy Morgan, John's wife. While he raided Ohio, I waited in Tennessee for news. When word came of his capture, I began a different battle lobbying Confederate and Union authorities for prisoner of war treatment reforms. Better conditions, prisoner exchanges, basic humanitarian standards. One woman's advocacy, born from personal anguish, contributed to gradual improvements. My husband invaded the North with cavalry. I invaded their conscience with persistence. For Union commanders, the raid provided valuable lessons. It exposed weaknesses in river defenses and internal security. It demonstrated the need for rapid response cavalry forces, even in supposedly safe territories. After Morgan's raid, Union authorities reorganized defensive structures, created better communication networks, positioned troops more strategically. In teaching the North how to defend itself, Morgan inadvertently strengthened his enemy. His failure became their education. The captured raiders faced harsh treatment. Many were sent to prisoner of war camps in the North, where they endured poor conditions, inadequate food, disease. Some died in captivity. Others eventually took loyalty oaths and were released. A few remained imprisoned until war's end. For these men, the raid meant years of suffering for weeks of adventure. They paid Morgan's bill with their freedom, their health, sometimes their lives. Morgan returned to duty in the Confederate Army, but never recaptured his former glory. His reputation had tarnished. Some officers questioned his judgment. He commanded smaller operations, achieved minor successes, but the daring brilliance that once defined him seemed diminished. Perhaps losing so many men haunted him. Perhaps his luck had simply run out. Either way, the Thunderbolt became just another cavalry commander, distinguished only by past mistakes. I am Private William Davis, one of the few who escaped back to Confederate lines. People call me lucky. I call myself haunted. I dream about comrades captured at Buffington Island. I hear horses screaming at night. When people ask about the raid, I change the subject. There's no glory in surviving when so many didn't. No pride in a raid that accomplished nothing except proving we could ride far into enemy territory and get destroyed there. On September 4, 1864, Morgan was killed in a surprise Union raid on Greenville, Tennessee. He died as he lived, caught behind enemy lines, refusing to surrender, going down fighting. 39 years old. His death came barely a year after his greatest and most disastrous adventure. Some said he sought redemption. Others believed he had a death wish, unable to live with memories of his failed raid and lost men. The stories lived on. Veterans told tales of the wild ride through Indiana and Ohio, exhausted horses, desperate escapes, narrow brushes with capture. Some embellished their roles, transforming defeat into adventure. Others remained silent, haunted by memories of abandoned comrades. Each man carried his own version, his own understanding of what the raid meant. History fractured into 1,000 personal narratives, none complete, all true in their way. I'm Reverend Thomas Hayes, chaplain to Indiana Militia. I ministered to dying Confederate raiders after Buffington Island. Young men, far from home, crying for mothers, sweethearts, God. One boy couldn't have been 18, kept apologizing for invading our state. He died holding my hand, asking forgiveness. War creates these moments. Enemies becoming human, hatred dissolving into shared sorrow. I still pray for those Confederate boys who never went home. For Northern civilians, the raid was a wake-up call. The war they thought distant and containable suddenly appeared in their backyards. Towns that sent sons to fight in Virginia or Tennessee suddenly faced Confederate cavalry in their streets. The psychological impact lasted long after Morgan's capture. The North realized it wasn't invulnerable, that war could touch anyone, anywhere. Security became illusion, not guarantee. For Southern sympathizers in border states, the raid became inspirational legend. Morgan proved bold Confederate commanders could strike the North itself. For weeks, one cavalry force terrorized multiple states, evaded tens of thousands of pursuers, demonstrated that Yankee military might wasn't invincible. The fact that Morgan ultimately failed mattered less than the audacity of the attempt. Defeat transformed into mythology through the alchemy of desperate hope. Military analysts study the raid as cautionary tale about overextension. Morgan violated his orders, pushed men beyond sustainable limits, invaded territory with no exit strategy. His initial success blinded him to strategic realities. By the time he recognized his mistake, escape was impossible. The raid demonstrates how tactical brilliance cannot compensate for strategic foolishness. Audacity without wisdom becomes recklessness. Courage without planning becomes suicide. I'm Daniel Webster, blacksmith in Southern Ohio. Confederate raiders stole every horse in our town. We spent weeks recovering, rebuilding. But the strangest thing happened years later. One of those raiders returned as an old man, visiting the place he'd once terrorized. We sat on my porch, two old men remembering when we were young and foolish. He apologized. I accepted. What else can enemies do when the war ends but forgive? The captured horses tell their own story. Thousands of animals ridden to death during the raid. Others abandoned when they could no longer travel. A few captured and put to work by Union forces. These horses, innocent victims of human conflict, suffered perhaps more than any soldier. They died of exhaustion, starvation, wounds, without understanding why they were driven so mercilessly through enemy country for no lasting purpose. Ohio communities through which Morgan passed preserve memories. Historical markers dot the landscape, commemorating skirmishes, captures, close calls. Local historical societies maintain records of property damage, personal encounters, family stories passed through generations. For these towns, Morgan's raid remains their closest brush with the Civil War, a brief, violent intrusion into otherwise peaceful history. The memory has become part of regional identity, shaped how communities understand themselves. Some of Morgan's men eventually returned to Ohio as old veterans, visiting places where they'd once fought. Former enemies met in awkward reunions, comparing memories, arguing over details, occasionally even forming friendships. These reconciliations, small and personal, represented broader national healing. Men who tried to kill each other decades earlier now shook hands and shared stories. Forgiveness arrived slowly, one handshake at a time, long after generals and politicians declared peace. I am Colonel Basil Duke, Morgan's brother-in-law and second in command, writing my memoirs in 1891. 28 years have passed since the raid. I've tried explaining why we crossed that river, why Morgan violated orders, why we thought we could succeed. Truth is, I still don't fully understand. War makes men believe impossible things. Youth makes them attempt those beliefs. Age makes them wonder how they survived their own foolishness and courage combined. The raid influenced post-war mythology about Confederate cavalry. Popular culture romanticized Morgan's raiders as dashing figures on horseback, gentlemen warriors who fought with honor and style. This mythology ignored harsh realities: the looting, the exhaustion, the terror inflicted on civilians, the ultimate failure. Like much Civil War memory, legend became more important than truth. Morgan transformed from flawed commander into romantic hero through the magic of selective remembering. Modern military historians analyze the raid through the lens of unconventional warfare. Morgan attempted what's now called deep penetration raid, striking far behind enemy lines to disrupt logistics and morale. Such operations require precise planning, clear objectives, established extraction plans. Morgan had audacity, but lacked these elements. His raid demonstrates that unconventional tactics without proper support become suicide missions. Boldness alone doesn't win wars. Planning does. I'm Elizabeth Harden, whose husband James rode with Morgan. He was captured at Buffington Island, imprisoned for 2 years. When he finally came home in 1865, he was a different man. Thin, haunted, silent. He never spoke about the raid. I raised our children alone, not knowing if he lived or died. These invisible casualties, the families torn apart, never appear in military histories. But we paid Morgan's bill too. The families of captured raiders endured years of uncertainty. Letters from northern prison camps arrived irregularly. Some families never learned what happened to their men until after the war. Wives raised children alone. Parents grieved sons, lost to a raid that accomplished nothing lasting. These suffering families, scattered across the South, represented the raid's true cost, not measured in military defeats, but in broken homes and endless waiting. Morgan's raid exposed tensions within Confederate command structure. Braxton Bragg had explicitly ordered Morgan not to cross the Ohio. Morgan's decision to violate those orders reflected a broader problem. Confederate generals often operated independently, ignoring coordination, pursuing personal glory over strategic objectives. This lack of unified command plagued the Confederacy throughout the war, contributing ultimately to its defeat. Individualism that seemed heroic actually proved suicidal. The Union's response demonstrated organizational capabilities that would prove decisive. Within days, thousands of troops were mobilized, coordinated, deployed. Telegraph communications allowed rapid information sharing. Railroads moved reinforcements quickly. The North's industrial and logistical advantages, evident in its response to Morgan's raid, would eventually overwhelm Confederate military skill. Morgan's raid inadvertently showcased his own side's fundamental weaknesses. His enemy's strengths destroyed him more than their soldiers did. I'm Governor Oliver Morton of Indiana. Morgan's raid tested my leadership during crisis. We mobilized 30,000 militia in days, coordinated with Ohio and federal authorities, maintained civilian order despite panic. These wartime successes translated into post-war political capital. I built a career partly on defeating Morgan's invasion. Strange how his failure became my success. History remembers him as the bold raider. I became governor because I stopped him. Some historians argue Morgan secretly hoped to inspire northern peace movements. If one small cavalry force created such panic, perhaps war-weary Northerners would pressure Lincoln to negotiate. This theory credits Morgan with sophisticated political calculation. More likely, he simply saw an opportunity for glory and seized it without fully considering consequences. Personal ambition, not political strategy, probably motivated his decision. Heroes rarely think as clearly as historians imagine. The raid's failure haunted Confederate strategic planning for the war's remainder. Other proposed deep penetration raids were rejected, deemed too risky after Morgan's disaster. Conservative commanders pointed to Morgan as cautionary tale about overambitious operations. This increased caution may have cost the Confederacy opportunities for bold actions that might have changed outcomes. Morgan's failure created strategic paralysis affecting operations he never knew about. One disaster echoed across multiple theaters. I am Frank Wolford, Union cavalry colonel who pursued Morgan across Ohio. The chase consumed 18 days, covered hundreds of miles, tested my men's endurance beyond anything we'd experienced. When we finally cornered Morgan at West Point, I felt not triumph, but relief. The hunt was over. We could finally rest. My men gained stories they told for decades, not about defeating Morgan in combat, but about outlasting him. Persistence defeated audacity. Indiana and Ohio militia, who participated in hunting Morgan, gained valuable combat experience. Many had never faced professional soldiers before. The raid transformed them from amateur defenders into experienced troops. Some militia units later joined regular Union armies, bringing hard-won knowledge to military operations. Morgan inadvertently trained his own enemy, making the Union Army more effective in future campaigns. His raid became their military education, paid for with Confederate blood. The raid cost the North relatively few casualties, but enormous economic damage. Destroyed bridges, burned supplies, stolen horses, disrupted commerce. The financial impact ran into millions of dollars. This economic warfare, striking at civilian infrastructure rather than military targets, foreshadowed Sherman's later march to the sea. Morgan pioneered tactics that became Union strategy, demonstrating their effectiveness against the very side he fought for. Innovation without victory is just expensive experimentation. I'm Sarah Jenkins, nurse in a Union military hospital. We treated wounded from both sides after Buffington Island. Confederate raiders arrived exhausted, starved, some delirious with fever. One young rebel kept asking if his horse survived. Another begged me to write his mother, tell her he was alive. These weren't monsters, just boys who'd believed their officers, followed orders, paid the price. War doesn't make heroes as often as it makes victims. Confederate newspapers initially celebrated the raid as brilliant victory. As the full story emerged, the capture, the losses, the strategic failure celebration turned to recrimination. Southern editors debated whether Morgan was hero or fool. Some blamed Bragg for inadequate support. Others criticized Morgan for violating orders. These public debates revealed growing divisions within the Confederacy about how to conduct the war. Unity fractured faster than armies could. The escaped raiders who made it back to Confederate lines received mixed receptions. Some were celebrated as heroes who survived impossible odds. Others faced questions about why they survived when so many comrades were captured. A few faced accusations of desertion or cowardice. Coming home from Morgan's raid carried psychological burdens that lasted lifetimes. Victory would have brought glory. Survival brought only complicated questions nobody wanted to answer. Union General Ambrose Burnside, who coordinated the response to Morgan's raid, gained some redemption after his disastrous defeat at Fredericksburg the previous December. Successfully capturing Morgan improved his reputation, showed he could organize effective operations when given proper resources and time. The raid paradoxically hurt one general's reputation while helping another's. Such ironies filled the Civil War's complex narrative. Failure and success existed simultaneously, depending on perspective. I'm Henry Campbell, farmer whose fields became a battleground during the raid. Confederate cavalry and Union militia fought across my land, trampling crops, killing livestock, burning my barn. Both sides promised compensation that never came. When the war ended, I had nothing but memories of violence and unpaid government promises. Nobody writes histories about farmers like me, whose only crime was living where armies decided to fight. The artillery pieces Morgan carried across the Ohio River and eventually abandoned symbolize the raid's larger trajectory. These cannon, dragged hundreds of miles through enemy territory at enormous effort, were finally left behind as the raiders fled. They accomplished nothing militarily but became relics, displayed in Ohio museums as trophies. The cannon's journey mirrors Morgan's own, initial boldness ending in capture and exhibition for enemy audiences. Former slaves in the regions Morgan raided faced complicated situations. Some raiders freed slaves they encountered, either from genuine abolitionist sympathy or to create chaos. Others captured free black people and attempted to bring them south into slavery. For African Americans in Indiana and Ohio, the raid represented both threat and uncertainty. Their experiences complicate simple narratives about the raid's meaning. Liberation and enslavement existed simultaneously in Morgan's wake. Telegraph operators played crucial roles in defending against the raid. They sent warnings ahead of Morgan's movements, coordinated troop deployments, maintained communication networks. Some operators stayed at their posts even as Confederate cavalry approached, tapping out final messages before fleeing. These civilian heroes, manning telegraph keys instead of rifles, proved as important as any soldier in stopping Morgan's advance. Technology defeated tactics where courage alone might have failed. I'm William Clark, Quantrill, Confederate guerrilla leader, watching Morgan's raid from Missouri. His mistake was trying to fight like a conventional army behind enemy lines. You can't maintain discipline, coordination, supply lines in enemy territory. You must become chaos itself, strike without pattern, disappear without trace, terrorize without mercy. Morgan tried to be a gentleman warrior. That's why he failed. War behind enemy lines requires becoming something darker than soldiers. The raid demonstrated the changing nature of warfare. Traditional cavalry raids relied on speed and surprise for quick strikes, followed by rapid withdrawal. Morgan attempted something more ambitious, sustained operation deep in enemy territory. But modern communications, railroads, mass mobilization made such operations increasingly impossible. Morgan's failure marked the beginning of cavalry's declining relevance in modern warfare. Technology was rendering horseback heroes obsolete faster than anyone recognized. Children in Indiana and Ohio who witnessed the raid carried memories into the 20th century. As old people, they told stories of Confederate horsemen appearing suddenly in their towns, of panicked evacuations, of strange Southern accents and unfamiliar uniforms. These childhood memories, passed to grandchildren, kept the raid alive in local consciousness. History lived not in books, but in family stories, distorted and enhanced by decades of retelling. Today, reenactors trace Morgan's route through Indiana and Ohio, commemorating the raid's anniversary. They ride horses, wear period uniforms, camp where the original raiders stopped. These modern performances keep memory alive while sanitizing its violence and terror. Reenactment transforms history into entertainment, making the raid's suffering palatable for contemporary audiences. We remember the adventure while forgetting the cost paid by those who actually lived, suffered, and died there. July 8, 1863, 1,000 Confederate cavalrymen stood on Kentucky's shore, contemplating dark waters ahead. July 26, 364 prisoners, the rest scattered, dead, or lost. What began with audacious hope ended in complete defeat. Yet the story survives, retold and debated, because Morgan's Great Raid embodies war's eternal paradox. Courage and foolishness often look identical until you finally know how the bloody story ends.